Hello and welcome to the Lib Dem Podcast. My name is John Potter, and today, returning to the podcast, is Sam Al-Hamdani. Hi, Sam. How are you doing?
Oh, brilliant, especially for getting my names correct this time.
Well, it's taken me 3 goes, but we've got there. So there we go. I can't believe you've brought that up again. But for the first time, we're going to ignore him from Oldham for the time being because we've got a new guest on the podcast. I'm delighted to say that Anton Georgiou has come on the podcast. Now, did I get your name right? That's the first thing, Anton.
Oh, perfect. It was perfect.
There we go. See, I just cared more about Anton than I did about you, Sam. That's what it is. So, and Anton, if anyone doesn't know, had a spectacular victory just about a year ago in Brent, becoming the only Lib Dem council in Brent. So welcome to the podcast, Anton.
Thank you very much. Very excited to be here.
And today's conversation is about campaigning and winning in diverse areas, in ethnically diverse areas. But also the flip side of that, because we've had conversations with the Lib Dem racial equality campaign, etc., about how we need to do more, not just pigeonhole candidates in areas where we think they'll represent best, but actually get them in winning seats. And Sam's here because you represent an area that is predominantly white. And so, we want
extremely predominantly white, yes.
Extremely predominantly white, and to get that alternative view as well. In fact, but maybe actually the Lib Dems need to just think, if it's a good enough candidate, let's get them elected. But let's start off with you, Anton, because let's talk about your election. So a year ago, you stood to become in a by-election in Brent. Now, to give it in Alperton. So give us a little bit of a background. What's that ward like? What's the ethnic mix like in Alperton?
Sure. So it is about exactly a year ago now, actually, that the by-election was called. It was towards the end of the general election, and it was obviously quite a disappointing general election for Liberal Democrats across the country, including for us down in Brent and in London. So Alperton is a ward that we've previously held. We held the ward from 1990 through to 2014. So when it came up and when the then Labour councillor, my immediate predecessor, was kicked off the council for naughty things, we really did think it was an opportunity, at least, to explore some different methods of campaigning, particularly in the aftermath of the general election. So Alperton is an incredibly diverse ward. It's about 50% or so Gujarati speaking. So a big South Asian community within the ward, but then there's also a considerable Muslim community as well. We have temples and mosques. We have a number of different churches with different denominations. So it's a really mixed ward, and one that, a year ago today, or a year ago nearly today, it was a challenge that we really wanted to take on in Brent. We didn't expect to win. So the story of the campaign is quite incredible, and the way that people came together, but I'm sure we'll cover that.
Yeah, and I suppose I should just point out just the size of the storm to victory that you had is that you went up by nearly 30% to win it. You went from like 9% to nearly 40% of the vote in taking that seat. And I just remember at the time, everyone just went, wow. And actually, we kind of had a hint because everyone saw you on every social media, thought, wow, Anton is really going for this. So what was campaigning like then? Okay, you guys both talk to me, okay. How do you think we need to campaign? Is there any difference in campaign, firstly, if you're going to go into different communities?
Well, I think that, first of all, it was very cold, but we'd all been prepared for the coldness because we just had a December general election. I think in Alperton, the story of Alperton is actually the story of the state of the area and the way that the community in Alperton had been let down for a considerable amount of time by the Labour Council and by Labour councillors who had represented the ward uninterrupted since 2014. And what we were able to do in Alperton was create a narrative that we were the party that could come in and actually, elect a councillor that would actually want to work hard and do the things that Liberal Democrats are known for. I mean, it helped, obviously, that the Liberal Democrats had previously held the ward, and that historic Liberal Democrat support still existed. For me, it's phenomenal that years pass, but people remember the work that former councillors do. So people like Councillor Daniel Brown, who held the ward before me, they all remembered the hard work that they'd done. So I think that's something the Liberal Democrats are particularly good at. If we get in, we do the hard work, and we do actually get on with the job, and people appreciate us for that. But to your question about how we campaigning areas like Alperton, I think it's just about being fearless about what we can actually achieve. I don't think that I approach the election as sometimes I believe Liberal Democrats do, in that, you know, it's an area that we haven't targeted for a while, so we shouldn't really put up a proper fight. I genuinely believe there was something there. I thought that something magical could happen towards the end of January, which is why we put our heart and soul into the campaign. And rather than, you know, being selective in who we were speaking to, you know, I said at the very beginning, what we need to do is we need to reach out to the electors. We need to speak to them. Some of these people that we're speaking to for the first time or for, you know, the first time in a very long time. And it's about speaking to people and getting that message across. So I think the thing I would say is Liberal Democrats need to be a lot less fearless, or be fearless about what we can actually achieve.
And Sam, let's talk about your area now. So this is just give us because you represent Saddleworth, West and Leeds, which is, I mean, any of us that did the Saddleworth by-election know there's a lot of countryside and a lot of hills in and around that area. But your ward is just on the outskirts, really. It's like semi-rural.
Yes, so Oldham itself is quite a large town, 200,000 odd. It's quite a strong ethnic mix, but then Saddleworth is slightly out of town. It's the rural area, and my ward is over 97% white, and that's increasing. Sort of 10 years earlier, it was 95%. But it's quite interesting listening to Anton talking through the approach there, how much was actually in common. So, you know, this is an area where, you know, a few years earlier, it had been previously Liberal Democrat held. There were, well, when I first started, it was 1 UKIP and 2 Labour, but then it become 3 Labour councillors. And they've not really done the hard, you know, they've not done the hard work. And so people have felt let down. People feel let down in Oldham by the Labour council. And you know, it was about going. We canvassed. We knocked on, I think, 98% of the doors in the ward in the year up to when I got elected. You know, we spoke to people for the first time. They'd not, the number of people who said, you know, no one wanting to get elected here has spoken to us. Mm-hmm. And so everything Anton was saying, despite, you know, we were talking about a diametrically, sort of in diversity, diametrically opposite kind of ward, it was the same approach. You know, it was about getting out there and speaking to people for the first time, and then remembering the hard work that Liberal Democrats had done before, and showing we could do it again, and believing in that.
And did either of you have any doubts? Did you think, is this the right seat for me?
I mean, I don't live in Alperton, and I always lambast Labour councillors for not living in the ward that they represent.
I've never lived in my ward. I've been elected 5 times and never lived in my ward. So again, it's not the be all and end all.
I think I'm walking back that criticism that I was making. But I think that the doubt I had was that I didn't really know the area as well as others did. But that's why I really spent time and have spent time over the last nearly a year really embedding myself in the community and understanding the issues that people face. I think that when we set out to contest the by-election, there were doubts within our minds amongst those in the Brent Liberal Democrats that you know, whether we could actually climb that huge mountain that that was in front of us, going from a poor 3rd place in 2018 to increasing the vote share to nearly 40% of the vote in a very short amount of time as well. And this was just after, obviously, Labour had swept the board in Brent in the general election. So they had just done very well in an election. So it was. I didn't doubt that we could do it, but obviously there are reservations at the back of any candidate's mind as you go into an election as to whether you might actually be able to do what you're setting out to do. But I think what I've fallen in love with Alperton over the last year. It's an area that I didn't know very well a year ago, but now I know like the back of my hand. And I think that that's what being a local councillor actually is all about, understanding your area, your community, your residents. And that's what I've enjoyed a lot over the last year.
Sam, what about you? Did you think, right, this is mine, I'm going to go for it?
Yes, I mean, I grew up sort of just up the road. So Saddleworth is lots of little villages, and I was born in the village 3 villages over. So I've grown up here. I know this area. Admittedly, when you go out canvassing and you find little bits of it that you didn't know after 40 odd years, but still, I mean, I knew it as well as it was possible to. I think that the one time I did question it, so I'm mixed race. My father's Iraqi, my mother's English, and bless them, they've been out delivering Liberal Democrat leaflets since before I was born, and they still do. My mum going around with a slightly dodgy hip, but still valiantly delivering her 3 rounds. She was out delivering leaflets, and this was fairly early on, and she just put a leaflet through somebody's door as they came out, and they looked at it, and you might have to edit this. He said, "I'm not voting for a fucking Muslim."
Mm.
And my mum won't tell me where that happened because she's afraid that I'd go around and yell at him, which I wouldn't. But it was like that, when something like that happens, you do question yourself.
Do you think that's something that's one of the concerns when you think of, like, say, we in the previous podcast, I've said we are, in the Preston Lib Dems, we have 9 councillors, all of us are white, and we have decided we are going to have our first target candidate who, in a held seat, is going to be, like I say, from Asian background. He's a Muslim chap he's good enough, so we've put him in a seat, then he can win. That's what we're going to have to do, because like many Lib Dem areas, our power base tends to be in slightly affluent suburbs, and that's where we are in Preston as well. But we can't make that change unless we change the face of who we are. And so we've put that decision up. Fires is going to be brilliant. He will get elected and it will be fantastic. But do you think there's a concern about almost like imposter syndrome? And it's whether you are someone, like I say, whether you're going into a white candidate going into a diverse area or vice versa. Do you think some of the candidates do feel a little like, I shouldn't be here. This isn't, I'm just not going to connect with the community. Is that something that people will feel?
Well, I mean, I am not I was born here, and this is a part of the world where, like, if you weren't born here, you're referred to as a comer-inner, even if you've lived here for 50 years. And that happened to me when I have lived here for, virtually all of my life. Moved away for a couple of years, came back. So everybody is going to, everybody is going to second guess themselves a bit. And I think for some reason, Liberal Democrats are particularly good at second guessing themselves and doing that. You need to be aware that it might happen and that people will need support. You get idiots. Unfortunately, most people aren't. And it's knowing in advance that might happen, and you got to, you take it and it hurts, and then you work out how you can cope with that, or if you're the person working with them, you give them the support that they need to be able to cope with that. Yeah. Because actually, I get a brilliant response from our residents, and that happened at the start, and then it was a one-off, and I haven't had anything like that again. So most people are, and Anton mentioned about, he's going out there and talking to people and making that kind of connection with people. Once you've connected with people, that gets you past that. People, when they feel they know you, like, even if they, like, this is a really weird thing to say, if people are almost a little bit racist, once they know you, that falls away from them. So even people who might have had that kind of tendency, it goes when they know you.
No, I absolutely agree. I think that prejudice does actually fall away when people understand that you are good at the job, you know what you're doing, you get things done. And I think that's what I've sought to do over the last year, actually get a lot done, do my casework, be on top of it, because that's not something that residents in Alperton were used to before I came along. The last time they had someone working the way I'm working was when there was another Liberal Democrat councillor in the ward. So I'm just continuing the Liberal Democrat tradition in that way. I mean, for me personally, I'm half Cypriot, half Mauritian. So my connection in terms of the communities in Alperton is limited. I don't speak Gujarati. I don't speak any other language other than English and Greek. And the Greek worked for 2 doors. I found 2 Greek people in Alperton, but other than that, so what I did in Alperton and what we tried to do was create diverse canvassing teams as well during the by-election. So people who actually were able to go out to some of the Gujarati-speaking households, some of the Muslim households as well, and speak to them, on their level about the issues that I care about, because generally speaking, most people care about the same issues at a local level. It's, it's their bins, it's the pavements, it's the potholes, it's the upkeep of local libraries and parks. Those are the things people actually care about. And I just think as Liberal Democrats, what we need to do better is actually try to reach out while speaking about those issues. We don't need to talk about different issues, because ultimately I think everyone cares about these issues, but it's about making sure that we try and it's about the candidate, but it's also about making sure the team around the candidate is diverse. And maybe you might be able to draw on people's experience or language skills to be able to go and speak to people in communities, like in Alperton, for example.
Hello, John from the Lib Dem Podcast here. We are delighted to say that this episode is sponsored by Prater Rains. Now more than ever, you need a professional-looking online presence and website. Prater Rains have been helping Liberal Democrat campaigns succeed for 18 years. Their Lib Dem Foci package combines a website, social media and email system to help Lib Dems win. You'll receive great support from real people, fair pricing and a huge range of features to choose from. Prater Rains are already the bespoke developers for Lighthouse, Lib Dem Draw Online and the LD Directory. They combine a talented system design with an unrivaled understanding of our party, our data and our systems. To find out more, check out the Prater Rains website at praterrains.co.uk/liberal-democrats. This podcast has been sponsored by the Katora Coffee Club, the UK's most environmentally friendly coffee club. There are over 400 independent roasters in the UK, each one crafting coffee in their own unique style. Katora Coffee Club works with some of the best to take you on a voyage of coffee discovery. The Katora Coffee Club delivers ethically sourced and independently roast coffee directly to your door. Each month you'll receive between 2 and 4 bags of coffee and their monthly extract magazine. Even better for Lib Dem podcast listeners, use the code BETTERCOFFEE to save 5% on subscriptions and gift boxes for a limited time only. All Katora Coffee Club boxes are carbon negative and offset the CO2. So why not do some good, enjoy some great coffee and check out the website www.katoracoffeeclub.com. Now, back to the podcast. And do you think the Lib Dems overthink this? Basically, just think, it is about just if you talk, you do get new campaigners who are really worried that, oh, look, I don't know everything about policy and stuff like that. And actually, the vast majority of what we do as local campaigners and councillors is just about helping people, sometimes with the simple things, because they don't know where to turn. And so, do Lib Dems overthink this?
I think campaigning is actually a conversation. I think you're talking to someone, you're talking to them at their front door, which is a very personal thing. And you're listening. Ed obviously has gone and is going, or is currently on a listening tour around the country. And listening is really important in politics, I think. And what we did during the first stage of the by-election was listen to people's concerns, because you can only form the campaign that you want to run and establish what those local concerns are by listening to the people that are affected by them. So I think I do believe that Liberal Democrats tend to overthink policy. The last general election, for example, for me, was one of the easiest general elections to campaign in, because we had a really good, strong message on the issue of the day, and it was really easy to talk about it, I thought. But beyond that, I found it quite difficult to talk about other issues. So obviously we constantly referred back to our Brexit policy. But the point is, campaigning should be a conversation. It should be at the start of a conversation with your residents and with local people, because that's how you form the sort of
relationship with them.
Relationship, but also you form your priorities and what you actually want to do. You can't predetermine what people want from their council or what they want from their local authority. You need to listen to people, and that's what I think we need to be a bit better at.
I think it's an interesting, yes, I completely agree. We overthink everything, but there's different elements of this. So there is clearly an issue in terms of we're an overwhelmingly white party with overwhelmingly white representation, and we need to deal with that. And it's not necessarily a case of overthinking it. We need to we need to challenge that. And that doesn't come from just, we need to be aware of that issue. And that's, in that respect, it's not overthinking. I mean, some of what we do is overthinking, but we can't ignore the fact that there is a problem there and that we have to do something about it.
So when I said overthinking, I should just point out, I don't mean Lib Dems are overthinking the problem of diversity. I'm saying Lib Dems sometimes overthink the struggles that having a diverse candidate will have in winning a seat. And actually, the basic principles, do they still apply?
Yeah, and that's the bit where I completely agree. Like, in terms of an individual, as long as everybody is in some way, they'll have something different about themselves and that is probably different to the majority of people in their ward. And if you're open and aware of that, like I did a talk on diversity for the Northwest regional conference, and somebody was talking to me about the farmers in their area, and there was like a small number of farmers. I was like, well, then that's what their point of difference is, and you having a different point of difference, as long as you can empathize, as long as you can reach out to people, and then that's fine. And so if you're worrying about this particular point of difference of a candidate, no, everybody's got something. So just, if they're a good candidate, get them out there, get them winning. But then let's also, let's remember at the level above that, yes, we do need to think about this more, because we need to get better at promoting. It's that difference between groups and individuals, and and that's a really difficult thing. People get really hooked up into, like, if you talk about, if you're in an ethnic minority and you talk about all the things that are statistically more likely, but then as an individual, none of them might apply. There's that really difficult thing between how you're applying this to an individual and how they're going out there and campaigning and winning and working, and how you talk about that generality. I find that interesting and difficult.
And Anton, just going back to your kind of campaign, I was just struck there because, like you've just mentioned, you were not from the Gujarati community, etc. So what did you do to try and not break into, because that makes it sound like you're trying to kind of almost get one over, but how did you kind of engage with that community before you got elected? What step? Because I think, again, that's something that some Lib Dems will think, well, we have no in on that community, so how do we even begin?
No, absolutely. And I think that the only way in is to start winning, and to prove to people that, we can win and we can get the job done when we are elected. For me, I was lucky, and I'm lucky, that Brent has quite a Lib Dem there's history here. The 2003 Brent East by-election will probably be one of the most famous by-election victories for the party. And when Sarah Tether won this seat, or at least the neighbouring seat to the ward that I represent, it really did change the way local people thought about the Liberal Democrats. Before Sarah won, there wasn't Liberal Democrat representation in the way that there was after Sarah won. We were able to take control of the council in 2006 to through to 2010. So that is where those relationships begun. And what I was able to do in my by-election was tap into those historic relations. So Sarah would visit temples, she would visit mosques, she would go to synagogues, she would go to different churches, and those relationships, still exist. And I think one thing that I sort of think the Liberal Democrats should be better at is not being so restricted in what we can achieve. I sometimes feel that I totally understand the need for targeting and the need to ensure that we are putting resource into the most winnable places, but we also need to be winning in places that, at the moment are dead to the party. Because if we can't win in those places, I would argue we're not really a national political party if we're only seeking to represent a small portion of the country. And winning in Alperton has meant that I've been able to re-establish those relationships that people like Sarah, people like the former leader of the council, Paul Lorber, had. So I've met lots of the community leaders, from the temples, from the mosques. And during the campaign, I made a concerted effort to reach out to these people, because actually, there's a significant DU community within my ward. And I was able to, I actually took Ed Davey, because Ed Davey kindly came to campaign on the first weekend of January, to his credit, this year that just gone. And he came, and I introduced him to the community leader in his home. The community leader took Ed and myself round to different households within the area where he knows there are people within his community who live there, introduced Ed Davey, introduced me as the candidate. And that really made a big difference, because once you start getting into meeting communities in that way, and they understand that, you know, what you're seeking to do is represent them as well. It's not about representing one over the other, it's about representing everyone. And that's something the Labour Party has really messed up locally. They sometimes are seen as only representing one section of the community over another, and they'll put, you know, a certain candidate or a certain councillor in this area, and they'll have another person who will then target that particular community in that ward. So it's all about divide and conquer. For me, it was about reaching out to the whole community and reaching out to all the diverse groups within my ward, and, you know, introducing them to people like Ed, and also Vince Cable came down as well. And obviously he's fantastic on the doorstep. So I think he's one of the best campaigners. And that made a difference. And I think that's what we need to be doing. We need to be establishing those relationships with people who matter within these communities. Because if we do that, we're sort of halfway there. If you build those relationships, then, you know, that's where you can build on them and hopefully win people's trust as well.
I think that must be the record for the most name drops in any section of this podcast in history. It must be so useful to have the grandees of and the leader of the party within a tube ride of getting to you. So, but I mean, what's interesting, and I'm interested in both your views, because you're both Labour facing, you're both, and there's an interesting kind of movement with the party. I don't think we talk about taking on Labour that much anymore as a party. Obviously, we get the national campaign. We know that majority of MP seats that we're second placing, we're against the Tories. We're also defending against the Tories, with the exception of Sheffield Hallam. I mean, the next after that is probably Cambridge, quite a long way behind. But you guys, obviously, at the coalface against Labour. I'm obviously taking on Labour in a council here, but my seat is predominantly Tory facing. So what do you think? Do you think Lib Dems have got to make sure, because what you guys have said is absolutely right. There's so many areas where Labour take for granted. They have had a very easy ride since coalition. And so what will you guys say to people who think, well, can we even take on Labour right now? What do you say to that, Sam?
Yeah, completely. They are, I mean, there's maybe one or two good Labour councillors around here, but the people I was up against were just not doing the work, and that's letting people down. They are not representing people. They are not doing the job, and that is recognisable in so many places. And that thing that you said about taking people for granted, you know, it's something we can never do, because we don't have that sort of nobody. 5% of people tick the Liberal Democrat box because it's Liberal Democrat. The rest of them do it because we actually get out there and do the work. Whereas if you're Labour or you're Conservative, like, you're going to get a huge chunk of your votes just because. And so it's it must be so easy to take that for granted, and so it happens. And so you get the occasion, you get some, you know, Labour or Conservative councillors who are, I'm sure, they're just good at their job, and fair play to them. You know, why you're in those parties rather than ours, I don't know, but still. But for the rest of them, like, if you're not on it, then you're just taking people for granted, and that is an abuse, really. You know, you're there to be the sort of backstop for people, the guardian for people, and you are there to stand up for them. And if you just sit on your laurels and kind of, like, you know, turn up to committee every so often, that's disrespecting your community, and I really am. That's outrageous. And so, you know, if you look around wherever you are, if you're in a dead zone, and, like, you do have like 59 of 60 councillors are Labour, well, a whole bunch of them are sitting on their arse doing nothing, and we can easily take those, because, like, you know, Anton got a huge swing. I can't even work out the figures on how good my swing was, but I went from losing by 350 votes to winning by the same proportion. You know, they got wiped out, and the Tories in my neck of the woods went from about 600 votes to 200.
250.
They barely exist here. So, you know, there are so many places where somebody hardworking and really committed can absolutely rip Labour apart because there are huge opportunities.
And it goes right.
I didn't know I had.
And it goes right the way up. I mean, I'm the chair of Overview and Scrutiny as the opposition leader on Preston, and it goes right the way up to the top. So even if you're thinking, "Oh, I can't take on a cabinet member," we had the cabinet member for Preston, who's responsible for recycling, who didn't know the recycle rate for Preston, and who didn't know that we'd stop collecting food waste. We had the mental health champion come on Scrutiny and didn't know the suicide rate for Preston and had yet to be in touch with the Samaritans after a year and a half. You know, these are perfectly, actually both those examples are perfectly pleasant councillors. There's some right rotters in Preston City Council, but these were, nice folk, but they drift and they take it for granted. But I'm really interested because Sam, you're in a group of 9, is that right?
8.
8, there you go. But so you've already got a little bit of a base. You're not on your own. Now, Anton, you are on your own. You're really on your own. There's just you, I think 3 Tories, and how many Labour councillors in Brent?
59.
Wow. So what's that like, Anton? I mean, are you seeing from your victory more Lib Dems coming forward? What are the prospects looking like?
Well, first of all, I think that we do need to take Labour on because we're better than the Labour Party. I think that the Liberal Democrats are always better representatives, and the only way we can prove that at a national level is if we do the work at a local level, and that's what people like us, we're doing it. We're working in our communities, and I think our work will pay dividends in the future because we're ensuring that people can trust our party and vote for us, at national level as well. And I think, only today I was thinking about Brexit and just thinking about how let down the Labour Party, how they let us all down. The whole thing that, the fact that we're now, scrimping for some sort of a deal, we don't know what's going to happen. I still firmly believe that the deal that we had as members of the EU is the best possible deal. And the Labour Party could have done a lot more to stop this calamity happening. So I'll never forgive the Labour Party for that. And that's why we remain the best, political force in British politics. But in terms of myself and what's happening in Brent, it's really difficult being the only Liberal Democrat. When I first was elected and I went to the induction for me and other councillors elected on the same day, the chief executive literally said to me, you're not going to have much to do here. You don't have any right to be on any committee. You will have possibly right to speak at full council, if the mayor calls on you. But other than that, you're just not going to have a lot to do at the Civic Centre. I really had to fight for a little office space, which doesn't have a lock. So I'm not convinced that, everything that's done in there is particularly private. So I try not to do anything in the Civic Centre and in my office, which used to be the mayor's robing room where he used to keep his robes. So it's very small. And it's been difficult because the sort of culture was that this was Labour. The whole place was Labour. Yeah, there are 3 Tories. They're pretty, out of it. They're not great. They don't really hold the Labour administration to account. So I've really taken it upon myself to be a real thorn in the Labour administration's side because someone has to be. And by doing that, I've actually gained a lot of support and sort of accolade from other parties. So the Green Party are really friendly to me as well. I've got lots of bloggers locally who are really keen on me, and also the local paper. I got them on side early on because I thought, it's really important that, we do have some form of opposition. In terms of what we can do in Brent going forward and, building on the success of Alperton, obviously I'd love to wipe out the Labour Party in Alperton and get 2 more Liberal Democrats with me. I think having 3 councillors in a ward is always better than having 1. I don't have any relationship with my 2 Labour councillors in my ward. They've refused point blank to cooperate with me, to discuss things with me. They sort of go round the offices to make sure that I don't find out things. So it's quite difficult, and it's a bit of a bullying culture, I would say. And I'll be honest, it's been very difficult for me personally, for my own sanity, that, this is all happening at the same time as me working flat out as well. So I think our ambition in Brent is to take my ward totally. So have that stronghold of Alperton within Brent. And, there are a couple more wards where historically we've done well, that we really do feel that, given that it's now, by the time of the next local elections, it will be 12 continuous years of Labour rule in Brent. We might be able to pick up some of those seats as well. But I envy your position as two councillors in groups. I really want some friends here as well.
Well, it just reminds me of John Leach in Manchester, Sam, who we both know, who was one Lib Dem out of 97. The rest were all Labour, I thought, something like that. But it's important, and I should just give a little plug to a previous podcast we've done. For those people who are thinking, oh my Lord, how are we supposed to get started? Go back and listen to the Starting From Scratch podcast. We had some brilliant guests on who came from places where, like you've both talked about having history in a seat. These people in the Starting From Scratch, there was no history at all of Lib Dem work. But you know what? Again, so many councillors, whether that's Tory or Labour or whatever, are both inefficient and lazy. And so it's amazing how much even one person can do, and the breakthrough that has. And you can just see in how they've reacted to you, Anton, exactly the same as how Labour reacted to John in Manchester or anyone else. It's like the affront to it. How dare someone question us? And then usually behind the scenes, they're usually telling us, yeah, the leader's rubbish, in the bars afterwards. But it's really interesting, Sam. I mean, I'm just really conscious that we get this across in this podcast, that there are no limits to Lib Dems, and try and local parties now, like I say, whether it's the Black Lives Matter protests that have happened this year, we cannot remain as we are, because ultimately that's not good enough. It's not good enough for us as a party, and to win more than what we are going to have to go into areas which we haven't gone into before.
Yeah, it's about, it does demonstrate, someone looking in Brent, for example, and looking at Anton, if you're one out of 60, is it? And that's incredibly difficult. And I have nothing but respect for what you're doing there. I mean, it's hard enough here in a group. I just think really tremendous. But it's once you're up there, like, other people can see you. Like I can remember having the conversation about, and going back to the idea of like diverse candidates in non-diverse areas or vice versa. Like, when I was growing up, I was very involved in politics and this was quite a strong Lib Dem area, but I never saw anybody that was, I think we've had on the borough council, we've had like maybe one or two councillors from Asian backgrounds. That's it. On the parish, I'm on my parish council as well. And I am the only ethnic minority councillor that there has ever been on that parish council since it was formed in 1974. So, like, whether it's being somebody who is from a different ethnic background or just being a Liberal Democrat in a non-Liberal Democrat area, like, it gives people that thought that, oh yeah, I can do that, in whatever way. I can be someone who is different to what the norm is, and I can go in there and I can make a difference. This is possible. And I think that, if you can inspire somebody to do that, that's fantastic.
I suppose I should end this by just saying what your kind of advice would be. So, Sam, from your point of view, if you're someone who is from an ethnic background, not knowing, is this right for me, what advice would you give them? Talk to you, I suppose, is the one.
Yeah, absolutely. I take on far too many things. So here's another one. Anyone who's from any ethnic minority background and wants to talk to me about what it is. Well, actually, I am on, so Isabel Parasram, who's one of the vice presidents and does work in diversity. One of the things we've been talking about, I'm on her advisory group, and we've been actively talking about, being the point of contact for people. So if you're just thinking about this, you can get in touch with me or reach out. There are people around who are, specifically here to give you support and advice. And there's the Campaign for Racial Equality, and there's lots of organisations around. So there are people here. If you're just uncertain, ask who you can ask. Get in touch with John. He'll put you in touch with one of us. If you don't have our email address, the podcast details are there, and just come and check it out, and no pressure, and we'll just talk to you about what it's like. Yeah.
Because I no harm in saying this. I've talked to you privately, Sam, about the candidate we've got coming forward, about Fires, who's about to be. I said, if he has any nerves about this, who could he talk to? If he doesn't feel he could relate to me or someone else, then there are people within. I thought, well, there's people like Shafak in Sheffield who leads there's lots of people who we can talk to make sure, because you're never alone ever in this party. There's always someone who can help you.
Absolutely, yeah. Just we're all here, and we all are doing far too many things, and we're happy to make one of those far too many things talking to you. Absolutely.
And Anton, to finish the podcast, what would be your, as we approach the anniversary of your fantastic success, what would you say to any Lib Demers thinking, I don't know if I could win that seat? Is that the right area for me?
I think the thing I would say is that, like what's already been said, there are always people in the Liberal Democrats who are there to offer support and guidance. I joined the party when I was, I think, 16 or 17. So I've grown up in this party, and I think that it's like a second family to me. And I know there are lots of our newer members as well who feel the same way. We are very kind, caring, loving people who actually want the best, which is why we do it. We wouldn't be Liberal Democrats if we didn't want the best for our communities, because it's really difficult to be a Liberal Democrat sometimes, particularly when we're seeking to win in places that we haven't won for a very long time or ever in the past. So one thing I would say to anyone considering standing for whatever office, whether it be local government or anything further up the ladder, do it. It's really rewarding. You'll go through setbacks. I've stood in a number of elections over the years. Granted, I'm only 26, but I have, and I've lost every single election bar the Alton by-election. And sometimes the magic just comes together at the right time for you. And I felt that, it has been a really interesting year to be a councillor. It's a very difficult year, of course, as well. And I've really cut my teeth over the last, 11, 12 months in Alperton, learning how to do the job. And if someone like me can do it, you can do it too. I think that it's really important to just get out there, because we're needed in British politics. I can't stress it enough. We need to have a Liberal Democrat force. We need an alternative to the establishment who have let us all down for so bloody long. We've got an incompetent Conservative government, still a totally useless Labour opposition, in my view. I'm not bought into, any change that's happened in the Labour Party. I think that they're still useless. And, the dream of a Liberal Democrat government is still a real dream. And it still should be something that we all want to aspire to. Obviously, it will take time, given the unfairness of the whole system that we work in. But it's what, this country needs and deserves, I think. And I hope that if you think that, then you'll consider it and keep plowing on and keep going, because people need us. So that's what I would say.
I was very worried you said I joined the party when I was 16, and that was like 3 years ago. I was really worried as I approach rapidly crash into my 40s soon. It's I thought, this is going to be depressing, but no, that's absolutely. I mean, I've loved this conversation. Thank you so much to both of you. It's brilliant to have you both on. And I hope you'll both think about coming. Sam, this is now your third episode on the podcast. We're going to have to get you something like a special badge or something like that to do. But you've been absolutely brilliant. I hope all the listeners have enjoyed this episode. I said, if you do want to get in contact, do get in contact with the podcast via email. That's at libdempod@gmail.com, or by social media if you want to message us. And we can certainly pass on anything you want to say. Do comment as well. Comment, like the episode. What do you believe Lib Dems should be really trying to get these areas? Are we giving Labour a little bit of a free ride? Is there opportunities that we just don't know about, that we just haven't grasped? But in the meantime, I want to say thank you very much for watching this episode, or whether that's on YouTube or Facebook, or if you've downloaded it, wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow everything to do with the podcast at Lib Dem Pod. And I hope you're all staying well. And in the meantime, we'll have another episode very soon. Thank you very much.